This call is now being recorded. This call is now taking notes.
In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, and by offering the peace and blessings to our beloved Prophet, we start once again the second practical lesson of this seminar entitled Gender and Sex. Now, previously we dealt with economic systems. Now we are going to discover something completely different. But as always, we apply the same things that we learned in the first part of the seminar, which is the theoretical part. Now, this session, my voice is glitching. All right, what about now? What about the others? Is it the same thing for them? Because I can hear myself clearly. I think it's problem with you specifically. Try to leave the call and then come back. Yeah, all right. So, like I said, this will be an ontological analysis. Now, what do we mean by that? So, ontology is the study of reality, the study of being. This is a sub branch of philosophy. Basically, you study the different elements of reality. And there are different schools of thought within ontology. But what you should know, basically, is that it is the study of being, study of reality and elements, particulars or universals. You can look up ontology, it's an interesting read. There is much difference between theorists in ontology, but we will see that in a minute. All right, so gender and sex. As always, before we dive deep, we have some preparatory questions. First thing is that, is there a difference between gender and sex? Is there a difference or are they the same thing? Do you have an answer to that? Just brainstorming what you know about the subject. Right, modern schools claim that there is a difference, but you are not sure whether to believe it or not. Well, what do you think? All right, you think they are the same. What about the others? Are they the same? And if they are the same, why do they have different names? And if they are related, in what sense? So these are the questions that we will try to answer in this session. All right. As always, we start with definitions, answering the question of what. What is sex? We start with sex and then we move on to gender. Of course, here we are talking about sex as in what you are attributed in your birth, whether it is male or female. So, sex is consensually defined as the set of biological attributes ascribed to a person at birth. It is about biology, right? Chromosomes, whether you have double X or XY. This is basically sex. Yeah, sure, I will do that. What about now? All right. Sorry about that. You should have told me before. Yes, one of you said that sex is a human related, while gender covers also other creatures, maybe. So you make a difference between humans and animals or plants. Okay, we will see that. So these attributes, these biological attributes, vary between chromosomes, hormones, reproductive organs, and physical features. This is well known, this is well noticeable. So these are what makes difference between sexes. Now there are three possible sexes assigned at birth. Usually people talk about two, but in reality there are three. First one is the male, the female, and intersex, which is also called hermaphrodite. So intersex in Arabic, khunta. Now even classical scholars, made the difference between female intersex and male intersex. Khunta unta wa khunta dhakar. Also even another distinction or category, khunta mushkil. It's the one that we cannot make a distinction whether it is more female than male or vice versa. So it is problematic. These are very few cases, but they do exist. And this is cured now, I think. Yeah, it is repaired. Uh, One of you said they make it seem like a common occurrence. No, I don't believe that it is their main argument for transgenders. I know that's what you are trying to say. But yes, some people do use it. In fact, if a person who is from this particular kind of intersex claims that he is either female or male, I mean, this is actually understandable. We can give him the right to be either one he wants or she wants. The problem is that when you are 100% male or female and then you make a transaction, or I should say a transformation, I think. Yeah, transition. Right. Okay. Although quietly kept in most cultures, like I said, the existence of intersex has been known for all pre-modern human civilizations. So we can find writings or signs that indicate that these people did exist. They were called many names. One of them is Eunuch as well. That's also one of their names. Some pagan gods were attributed as intersex also. So this was the definition of sex, and this is consensual, like I said. This is agreed upon by everyone so far. Now let's move on to gender. Now, to better understand gender, we must differentiate between two main views and schools of thought. These schools of thought are essentialism and constructionism. These are two separate and different schools of thought. Often they are opposite to each other. They provide a binary view of reality. This is not only pertaining to gender or sex, but these schools of thought apply to any concept. Yes, so essentialism is also called objectivist epistemology. All right, objectivist. There's also a philosophy that is called objectivism, which is actually, it's not made, but it was structured by a woman, actually. She was a Russian American, I think. She is called Anne something. Anyways, so in this objectivist epistemology, reality exists independently outside of the mind. This is something that we already discussed in the theoretical parts. I just didn't give it this name, but it did exist. So truth, therefore, stems from the one single reality that exists, which is also ontology. That's what I already explained. The study of reality as it is. Although there are also different schools of thought in ontology. So one of them pertains to objectivist epistemology, but another on the other side. So these are, as you can notice, dichotomies. We already covered that before. Empirical facts alone define reality. So of course, if we say that reality exists outside of the mind, then the only way to define this reality is by using empirical facts, things that can be proven. Empirical here, not only in numbers and equations, but anything that can be proven. And of course, this is self-explanatory. It uses objective criteria. And it can be applied to all contexts. So of course, if we give an objective understanding and conclusion, then this is a general rule. And at last, it leads to consistent results. Why? Because it is used on all contexts. So it doesn't matter whether the context is different. Now let's move on to constructionist epistemology. Like I said, it is the opposite. So no one true reality exists. There is no reality. It simply depends on human experience. Your experience is what shapes reality in your mind. But reality in itself does not truly exist outside of the mind. This is also called nominalism. All right, nominalism is the opposite of realism. So, like I said, in ontology, there is realism and there is nominalism. They are opposite. Sometimes nominalism is called conceptualism. So it is a concept. What you conceptualize in your mind is reality. These are philosophical concepts. Truth isn't there to be discovered. If reality does not exist, then truth does not exist, but rather made. You make your own truth, based again on human experience. Human activity and symbolic language is what makes this truth. All right? That's why we can agree on few things, because humans have agreed upon these symbolic languages or activities. Some of you, or one of you asked, what about, I think you mean nihilism, yes? Nihilism? Yes, nihilism is a philosophical school of thought which ascribes to nominalism. But, it adds the fact that since meaning does not truly exist, therefore life is meaningless and you should live based on this fact. You should not even make truth or make meaning. It is meaningless. So don't try to do that. That's the difference between the two. But in essence, they ascribe to the same view of reality. And obviously, it uses subjective criteria. It cannot use objective criteria since truth does not exist and reality does not exist. Now, uh, the value of this constructionist view is that it provides contextual understanding of phenomena. It is better than objective epistemology in this instance because it is made solely to understand things subjectively. And when you insert context, then there is a lot of nuance. While objectivist epistemology does not really take nuance in consideration. These are all concepts that we discussed and made clear in the theoretical part. Everything is clear? Okay, great. So now we can move on to gender. Now let's look at gender through the lenses of both objectivist and constructionalist epistemology. Let's first start with constructionism. So according to constructionists, gender is a social construct and not an intrinsic part of human makeup. So these are the people that ascribe to this idea that gender is a social construct. Now, what do we mean by that? We mean that gender does not actually exist, but rather it was structured by society and imposed by force through societal norms and values and religion, etc. The distinction between biological sex and socialized gender roles and attributes. So they make a distinction. They say that sex is not gender and gender is not sex. Yes, sex, we agree that sex is the biological attribute, the chromosomes, etc., because that's It cannot be denied. Even people who ascribe to nominalism. Yes, reality does not truly exist, but we agree on this. However, they say that sex has no bearing or no influence on gender. I should here make a clarification about gender. Gender here is understood as masculine and feminine. In sex, we talk about male and female, but in gender, we talk about masculinity and femininity. So they say, yes, male and female exist, but masculine and feminine, these are simply social constructs and do not intrinsically exist in the human. Therefore, for example, if we apply they call it l'homme sauvage, the savage human who we live in the jungle, he will grow up without any masculine or feminine attributes. But is that true? That's what we are going to find out. However, what do you think? For example, if we let a person grow up without any social influence, not even brought up by his parents, would he develop masculine or feminine attributes? Right, these people do not believe in natural inclination. Of course, these are evolutionists, although I will make the point that even if we follow evolutionist theory, we have to ascribe gender attributes. It doesn't matter about whether he will survive or not. This is not what we are trying to discuss. Let's say he survives. But it is a good point that you raised because for him to survive, he should have some attributes. These attributes will tend to be masculine if you are talking about a man. But even in the case of a woman, that's the challenge. So keep that in mind. Now, gender is defined as the set of features relating to both masculinity and femininity, like norms, behaviors, roles, type of clothing, actions, attitude, etc. So this is how gender is defined according to constructionists. These people reject the notion that sex has any real influence on gender and argue that such roles have been reversed in certain societies. They say that these roles are not constant in every society, which means that they are socially constructed. If they were intrinsic to the human being, then we will find the same thing occurring time and time again, no matter the society and the time. But we find that that's not the case. So what is the reason or what is the explanation to that? Now they give the example of patriarchy and matriarchy. Patriarchy is the system where the man dominates, basically, men in power, and they do not share this power with women. In matriarchy, some people think that it is the opposite of patriarchy, but that's not the case. Because in matriarchy, uh, there is no real dominance of the women, but it is more or less egalitarian. It's an egalitarian society where men and women are equal and they both can rule. So sometimes it can be a woman, sometimes it can be a man, sometimes simultaneously. But a real matriarchy has never been recorded in history, where the women, they like to say that Amazonians were matriarchal, but it's a myth. They did not even exist. So,
And even if it wasn't a myth, Lebanon is they were alone. They're only female, so it can be considered.
right, yes. They refused to accept males in their society, but that raises another question. How can you survive without a man? Just from a reproduction standpoint, right? So yeah, we cannot even make this point because it was not a total opposite. Matriarchy just gives more role for the women outside of the household into politics and society, etc. So gender identity then is a self-expression in response to society's view to gender as a whole. Like we said, society is the one responsible for constructing gender and gender roles. Now, in this case, individually, these people came up with what is called gender identity. It is what you feel inside of you, not what society imposes on you. Society may tell you, as a man, don't cry. But if you feel like crying inside, if you are an emotional man, that's your gender identity. Maybe you can ascribe that to femininity. And you can see where this is going. كمل من راسك كما كيقولوا. So this distinction between gender and sex creates this gender identity, which is what you feel. It doesn't matter what is your sex. And of course, you are not ascribing to society's views on gender. You think that's oppression. It is oppressive. But they do not ask themselves, why did society impose it to begin with? Where did that came from? That's the real question that constructionists did not even ask or bother to answer. Feminism and a social construct. How does feminism see gender in light of this theory of social constructs? Feminism as an ideology promotes the constructionist view vehemently. It means there are strong arguers for this view that gender is a social construct. It uses social construction of gender as an explanation to female oppression and presupposes that men are the ones responsible for this construction and also its continuation. So that's how it uses this theory. It says that gender is a social construct. In fact, the most famous and prominent feminist, do you know who she is? She's famous in the 20th century. Simone de Beauvoir. All right. She's the one that said, uh, you are not born, but you become a woman. You are not born a woman. You are becoming a woman. So it is a gradual process. Why? Because you are conforming to gender roles according to society's view. All right. So this is her position, and it is by default the feminism position. So they say that the man is responsible for this. He oppressed us to believe that this is what the woman should be, this is how she should act, this is how she should behave, this is her role, etc. All right. But what do you notice in this theory? There's a big hole. Because at first we were talking in general about both male and female. Gender as a whole is a social construct. But what did feminism do? They ascribed the social construction
As per,
only to who?
they said only there was only a male at first, and then there's only one gender.
Right. Very good. So they said that the man was like this from the beginning. Because who socially constructed what is a man? How did it begin? This is the question that I posed before. They don't have an answer to that. Why did it become the way it is? They don't have an answer to that. But feminism, as it tends to do, it puts the blame on men and just focuses on women because that's what the ideology is, anyways. It's an ideology for females. So they say that men socially constructed what a woman is, but who socially constructed what is a man? We don't know. And if they say the man did it, how did he do it? How did he come up with it, anyways? This is ironically what another feminist activist replied to. She is called Elizabeth Gross. She answers this by saying that constructionism is inherently reliant on essentialism, for it needs to make explicit what are the raw materials of its processes of construction. That's the question that I said. Who made it this way to begin with? What is the raw material? How did it begin? And these cannot themselves be constructed. If you say the man constructed it, what we will have is what she calls, and these cannot themselves be constructed without the assumption of an infinite regression. Infinite regression. You will be going back infinitely. You will never reach the starting point. The man constructed it, and another man before him constructed it, and then you keep on going. Infinite regression is illogical. It does not exist. Impossible. Therefore, this whole ideology is rubbish. It is to be dismissed. Is that clear? All right. Now let's see the results of the constructionist view. One of you here have or has said before that one way to judge things is by looking at their results. This is true, and this is what we will do here. Following the constructionist view, which became the mainstream. So yes, it is like Muhammad Ali said, the modern school. The gender spectrum is still expanding to this day and encompassing new forms of gender, supposedly. All right, now they have, I think, 72 genders. Maybe there's even more. That's the last update I checked. I don't know if there is anything new, but it became something fluid. There is a gender spectrum, not just attributes that are a spectrum. No, the gender itself. Now look at this illustration. Can you believe that these people actually believe this thing? Look here, for example. So the whole body is female, but only the head is male. Therefore, it creates this abomination. So the mind thinks as a man, but the body is female. That's what they want to say. Let's see here. Half of the body is male and the other is female. There's confusion between the two. Who gets the last say? We never know. You know, these things were classified as mental disorders before the 70s. This one kills me. Now, what is this? The whole body is the whole body is male except the stomach. So what? Like he can give birth or what? Like, can you believe these people? Like, it's crazy. And for the women, like she cannot give birth. So this part is male. She is barren, maybe. Look at this. The upper half is female. Anyways, no, this one. Only one hand is male. So how does it act? Like, what does it do? It oppresses domestic violence. Anyways, this is a meme, but these people actually believe these things. What can you say? When you say that reality does not exist, I mean, obviously we'll come up with anything. So, gender, like I said, is then a fluid term that cannot be defined on its own. Cannot be defined, cannot be shaped. It is all of these abominations that we have here. Moreover, even the concept of sex has lost its value accordingly, as it plays no significant role anymore. What do I mean by that? Is that sex here is only a word. It has no influence on anything. It has no real life applications. Okay, you are a male, but so what? You are a female, so what? You have these chromosomes, but they have no influence on how you act, how you think, how you should live. And your gender is a spectrum. You can be whatever you want. It's fluid. So does sex here have any real value? It doesn't. So here, even sex, and this is the irony, at the end of the day, they made sex and gender the same thing. So they made the distinction only to arrive that they are the same thing. Your gender is actually your sex, but you can decide it. So it's not the other way. It's not that the gender is based upon your sex, but no, your sex is now based upon your gender. That's why we have transgenders or transsexuals. That's the explanation. Because I feel this way, therefore my sex should be aligned with the way I feel. It's not the opposite. That's a sign of a mentally ill person, starting from the problem and trying to fix it. All right, now we move on to the essentialist view. This is the dominant view throughout history, except for, of course, the modern times. It was that gender is deeply rooted and tied to sex attributed at birth. It is deeply rooted, you are born with it. It is tied to the sex. Gender roles are intrinsic qualities in both men and women. They are intrinsic, as opposed to socially constructed. You are born with them. It holds the argument that there are universal and innate biological and psychological features based on gender. There are universal gender roles and gender attributes. This is something that we can observe. It exists. For example, can you give me some examples of these universal gender attributes that apply at any time and anywhere? Right? One of you said the man provides, the woman cares. Well, in history, yes. Right. This was universal at one point. Today, that's still the case, but to a much less degree. Physiosocial roles, like what? Can you give me some examples? And what do you mean by physiosocial? That's the first time I encountered this term, but it makes sense. Or I think of masculine traits or feminine traits that are universal, even to this day, even after the constructionist view has taken over. We still have these attributes. For example, women are emotional or dramatic. Descriptive, like in what? In character or in appearance? We are not talking about appearance here because that's sex. That's not gender. Manhood. Right. Manhood, but it's the same as masculine. So, what is masculine? What makes a man have manhood? Strength. Yes, this is physical, but also mental. Wisdom. Right. Yes, wisdom is a gender trait, usually ascribed to men, etc. We will see these examples. Like there are many. I don't know why you struggled to give some. Right, reason and affection. Yes, being logical. Correct. The man tends to be more logical. The woman tends to be more affectionate. Debatable in our time. Audacious. Shy, very good. This is a great example. Yes, even to this day we have it. Although less to the shy part. You know, females are much more shy, or much more, or much less shy than they used to. And Of course, men also are not as audacious as they once were. This is the effect of the constructionist view. We should understand that social construction is a very powerful thing. Social engineering exists, and we will see that in later parts. Yes, risk taking, initiative, very good. Initiative, yes. The man takes the initiative. This is about being active and passive. So at first, the view was based on religious and philosophical arguments. However, it shifted to rely on biology in the 19th century. Before the new discoveries of biology, people who hold this view, which of course was the dominant view, relied on religious and philosophical arguments, which also uses some biology, of course, because here we are talking about sex, but mainly it was religious and philosophical. But then this essentialist view relies uh, dominantly on biological evidence. So let's see these arguments. The historic argument. For essentialists, sex influenced gender roles in the early days of humanity in different ways. So at the beginning of humankind, these roles were defined. Physical and mental differences, such as hormones and body traits, determined what men or women should do. Imagine a primitive society or a primitive tribe, because back then it was not even a society, or just a family living in a cave. How did they differentiate between the tasks that each one should do? It's due to these physical and mental differences, which are based on sex. You are born with them, your hormones and your body. You are born with it. You have no control over it. So, for example, men who are physically stronger were assigned to do difficult and dangerous tasks such as hunting, fighting, protecting, and farming. So these tasks oblige the person to have some gender qualities. You have to be resilient, you have to be courageous, brave, taking the initiative, like you said. Imagine you are living in a cave, and back then, all sorts of dangerous animals are roaming in the forest or whatever. You have to have incredible courage to just go out, find something to eat. You have to protect, be protective. The man is protective, etc. So this is just one example, of course. And basically, you have to be tough. The man has to be tough. Therefore, he developed these traits. But all of these traits are based on sex. Because if you were not born man, you would not go experience these things. You would not have to have these qualities. Women, on the other hand, who were physically weaker and had to give birth, also we can add menstruation, which plays a big role, especially in history, even to this day, were assigned tasks relating to nurturing the family, such as cooking, cleaning, raising the kids, etc. So, housework in general. That's how you have this distinction between no, the man should go outside, provide, and the female has to take care of the house. Things happened because of a reason. It was not arbitrary. This constructionist view that does not even provide reasons why, and just presupposes that men who are responsible for this or society. But who made society? So they do not go a step further. That's why they do not reach the truth. So these, like I said, are just some examples. Of course, when you are physically weaker and you do not face these challenges that the man faces outside, you are obviously delicate in opposition to being tough. You are affectionate because you are raised in the caves. You are taking care of the man when he is back, etc. You are emotional also for many reasons, such as hormones, but also just the fact that you do not live the life of a man outside. It gives you the chance to be emotional. And we can see it today for women who are uh, in the workforce. They tend to sacrifice a lot of their emotionality and delicacy just to make their way in their daily life because they have to face reality, face the outside world, etc. It is a cold and cruel world, yes. Therefore, you cannot be the woman that you are supposed to be because you will be taken advantage of. The same way that a woman back then, if she goes outside of the cave to try to hunt, she would be prone to much more danger and most likely will fail to survive. Therefore, the best way or the best chance she has is that she takes some masculine traits because they prove to be efficient for survival. Same thing applies, of course, to a much less degree, but still, same thing applies to this day. Let's move on to the religious argument. All major religions in history, pagan or monotheistic, made clear distinction between masculine and feminine roles in society. They made clear distinction between man and female. All religions. For example, in pagan religions, gods, false gods obviously, were ascribed either male or female traits. We have the god of sex itself, the god of fertility, the goddesses of the moon, etc. You know, even the Arab pagan gods were mostly female, except for Allah. With few exceptions having both, which is intersex. And intersex, like we said, is also a gender on its own. But there were no such thing as different genders like today. In the Gospel and the Torah, men and women share some religious obligations, while differing in others, mainly based on gender roles. This is in the case of Christianity and Judaism. Uh, some roles are, or some obligations are shared. Of course, you have to worship the same God, you have to do the good deeds, but some obligations are totally different based on gender roles. Even in the Gospel and the Torah, the woman was asked and ordered to stay at home, not even lift her head when the man is talking. And like I said here, the veil as an example, this is also the case for Islam. So the woman should wear the veil, while the man should not. Therefore, we are here clearly ascribing differences between genders, and without making any distinction between sex and gender. Because God created Adam and Eve. This is the story of creation. In Islam, the same thing applies, obviously. However, there is a point. It does not rule out the role of social construction in shaping some gender traits. It is mentioned in Islam. Can you guess, or can you tell me, where does it mention that? There's a clear verse that mentions this social construction. It hints on it. It does not say, obviously, that gender is a social construct, but it makes a very good point that we will see later. Do you know the verse? Of course, I should mention that in Islam, and also even in the other monotheistic, quote-unquote, religions, just the fact that you are trying to mimic or become the other gender is totally forbidden and is a great sin. Right, excellent. أو من ينشأ في الحلية وهو في الخصام غير مبين. This is social construct. أو من ينشأ في الحلية. It means that this upbringing plays a role in the gender qualities of the woman. And obviously, the opposite is true. So for the man, he is not brought up in الحلية. Therefore, he has other attributes. So keep that in mind and try to understand. Like here we are obviously making the point that the essentialist view is correct. But how so? Now we are finding out that even in Islam we have social construct. How can we combine between these two? This is the question. Also, there is another argument, which is that one's eternal gender is impossible to be different than one's eternal sex. For example, of course, we are believing in heaven and hell. Let's say that a man or a person in his mind feels that he is a woman, but he has the body of a man. In resurrection, will he be resurrected as a man or a woman? Will he be in heaven or hell as a man or a woman? This distinction does not make any sense. Therefore, this argument holds true because your eternal gender is, by definition, your eternal sex. God himself will address you as your sex. Of course, if you are a believer. Alright, yes, إخشوشانو. Correct, so this is masculine traits. Of course, you have a lot of this in Islam that hints on social constructs, or let's say the role of social construct in gender qualities. Let's move on now to biological argument. So, biological reductivism claims that anatomical and physiological differences between males and females determine much of the meaning of masculinity and femininity. If we say there is a male and female, then masculinity draws from malehood and femininity draws from femalehood. As simple as that. Now let's give some examples. Testosterone which is obviously the male hormone, is responsible for traits that are not only physical, as the constructionists like to believe, but rather also physiological and mental traits, such as aggression, strength, vigor, courage, and also dominance. These are all not only physical traits, but mental traits, characteristics, which we ascribe to masculinity. Therefore, masculinity has something to do with your hormone. Your hormone is something that you are born with. How can you make then this distinction? This is blatantly false. While on the other hand, estrogen, which is the female hormone, is responsible for sensitivity. This is also, by the way, proven scientifically. All of these traits and their relation to the hormones have been proven. Mood swings, anxiety, emotionality, and even depression. So estrogen is responsible directly for these things. And of course, women have much higher estrogen levels in comparison to the men. Therefore, they are much more sensitive, emotional, anxious, which is also more or less the opposite of courageous. They have a lot of mood swings, which make them less logical, and they tend to be more depressed. We can even take the case of a man who has some hormonal disorder. When his estrogen levels are higher and his testosterone level is lower, this is directly tied to his behavior. You can clearly observe, and of course, not just us, it is well known even for psychologists, that this is the main reason for the way he acts and behaves. So he tends to take more feminine attributes and leaves masculine attributes. The simple fact that a man has to fertilize the woman, this is also biology, means that he is proactive and she is receptive. Just this case alone, we can draw from it a lot of gender traits and qualities, like initiative. This influences much of the social relation between the two, aka society, because it is made of man and female. For example, men seek in women in the form of asking their hand for marriage. This is a form of initiative. It is the man who asks the hand of the woman. Why? Why that's the case? Constructionists say this is social construct. But we can clearly see that it has much more to do with biology. And there are also a lot of examples other than this. Being proactive, it means a lot of things. It also means that men are disagreeable and women are agreeable. Women tend to say yes and agree more, while men are much more disagreeable. Why? Because they have to take initiative. They encounter a lot of hardship, a lot of disagreements in their life. All of this is taken from a historical view. Of course, if you start from the 21st century, things will look much more different. And you cannot make a lot of these claims. All right. Before that, do you have any questions? Everything is clear? Do you have any more examples to add that ties with this biological argument or whatever? Okay. We have then a question tied to what I mentioned before. Are all gender qualities and roles intrinsic to sex only? This is a very important question. If we say this, then we ascribe 100% to the essentialist view and we deny 100% the constructionalist view. I call this the nuance. This is the gray area in relation to this topic. Right? Does anyone have an answer?
Of course, like you said before, the social construction plays a big role, of course.
Right.
So we cannot say all gender qualities and roles are intrinsic to sex only.
Yes. That's correct. So therefore, social constructs does exist. But then again, we have another question. What is the extent of this social construct? How much is it responsible for these gender roles and qualities? That's what we are trying to discover here. Now let's first approve this
That's where
side.
sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Yes,
I
please.
believe that's where religion comes in to define these limits.
Excellent. Very good. Yes. This is one way to do it. Of course, if you have a code, then it takes care of everything. Tells you what to do, what not to do, where to stop, and where to start. All right, so like I said, let's affirm this part. Some gender attributes can hardly be traced to sex directly. Here I said hardly. They can be. All gender traits can be traced to sex. All of it. In some way, shape, or form. But some of them are hardly traced. Such as men being competitive, for example, or leaders, or emotionally repressive. That's what I said before, that they do not like to cry or show emotions too much. They are not emotional in general. And also women being overly dramatic or passive aggressive. Like I said, you can trace these things back to biology and history, etc. But it is more so socially constructed in a way. Such traits are more so the work of social constructs, even though they draw origin from natural and biological reasons. So we affirm the two sides, but they both are playing a role in shaping these gender qualities. Let's start with men. Being a leader is a result of the responsibilities put on his shoulders socially, which of course he must take care of in order to have a respectable social status. This is society. Status is a social construct. You have to have a good status as a man, at least a respectable one. Therefore, you have to be competitive first, because all men are competing for that status. All of this is social. And the responsibilities. which they draw origin from biology, of course, like men being protective, provider, etc. But now that we are living in a society, we are not anymore fighting with animals and so on, but we have some responsibilities the same way that they did before. You still have to provide for the family. You have to be the leader. You have to be responsible for them. So this is socially constructed in a way. When you are bringing up your child, you are not taking him to outside and leaving him alone and saying he will learn. This is, of course, a very dangerous way to learn. Yes, he can learn that way, but it's very dangerous. So what you do is that you socially construct him to get the same results. You tell him, or her, in this case, that this is what you should be like because such and such. You give the reasons. The problem is that at one point people stopped giving the reasons, and therefore this idea of gender being a social construct started to appear and become famous. That's the problem. And then people started to think that all of this is just socially constructed. It's just the way they were brought up or brainwashed. But no, actually, there are reasons. But humans tend to become dumber and dumber by the time. For women, being passive aggressive or dramatic is a method or a way to create a balance and hold leverage in their relation to men and society. This is soft power. This is passive power. Men have active power. Women have soft power. And it creates a balance. You know, emotional or being emotional is powerful in a sense because it uses the weakness of the other or draws on it in a sense. It brings sympathy, it brings affection, and the
Well,
man was created that way.
it also kind of uses the strength of a man because he's protective. So when he sees weakness, he,
Yes,
he kind
he
of
gets the desire to protect.
exactly.
Right. Yeah, this is something that us men observe in ourselves. You know, even if you just look at a woman crying, you feel something. Even if you don't know her, it gives you a feeling. It draws on your masculine instincts. So yes, this is how God actually created this balance. It was created this way. Or else, you can imagine, I'm pretty sure women would have been treated like objects without any remorse or any rights, actually. Because at the end of the day, power, active power, is stronger than passive power. And that's why at the end of the day, the man is qawam, he is responsible, he is the leader of the women. But of course, there is a limit to this. It's a fine line. Very few people know when and where to stop. All right, finally, we reach the conclusion. Now, let's combine these two schools of thoughts in a way that gives us the perfect image. While essentialism provides an ontological and consistent view on gender, it leaves few things to be desired, such as how can we explain the different extents of masculine and feminine qualities in people. If we say that all people are born, of course, with their gender, then it means that all of them more or less should be equal in their extent. So any woman should have equal amount of femininity, and any man should have an equal amount of masculinity in comparison to other men. But that's not the case. These extents vary vastly. So then this is a hole in the essentialist view. They did not properly address this problem, but not all of them. Actually, some of them did later. So we have to affirm the social construct. In this case, we can resort to the constructionist view, which explains this phenomena contextually. Here we need context. Here we need to have that spectrum. Do you remember that spectrum that we talked about a long time ago? The two extremes, and we have the spectrum to talk about or to take in consideration the nuance. This is where we can use it. So let's say that we have two extremes. On one side there is masculinity, on the other side there is femininity, and there is a spectrum. This spectrum, at the middle we have zero, neutral. Some qualities are neutral. And then we have masculine and feminine traits. Some people are on the extreme of masculinity, some people are on the middle. They are not equal. And this has a reason why the context differs. The social construct here plays a role. So the social construct is the responsible factor for the difference of extents. I hope this is clear. So by combining elements of the two views, we understand that even though gender can only be divided into two, there are different degrees and forms that fall under this dichotomy. This is the spectrum, not a gender spectrum in the way that constructionists and feminists believe, but a gender quality spectrum. For example, let's take, for example, the quality of submissiveness. The woman who is submissive is very feminine, but not all women are submissive, let alone some women are little submissive and some women are very much submissive. So this is the spectrum. Some of them have 10 out of 10, some have 7, some have 3, some have 1. All right? So that's the spectrum that we are talking about. And the reasons, of course, relate to social construct. The way they were brought up, the way they are living their life, their ideologies, their beliefs, all of this plays a role. Such features are both rooted in sex and enhanced by social construction simultaneously. Yes, please?
Can we say that only social social construct is what makes this difference, not like different
I
different
understand.
in hormones and difference in
No, we cannot say that because both play a role. Like we said, the level of your hormones. Some people are born with some deficiencies.
exactly.
Some people have a high level of testosterone, and some people have high level of estrogen. So then that makes a difference. This is biological and predetermined in a way. It can be cured, but it is predetermined. You are born with it, you have no hand in it. However, in social construct, this is something that is not natural, but artificial. It is done by society or even by yourself. People think that being socially constructed is only due to outside influence. But no, you can sometimes influence yourself. That's also part of social construct. So yes, both of them play a role, basically. So that's what we are trying to do here. We are trying to combine these two views to make the perfect view, the complete view, which Islam affirms. Islam affirms these things, that you are born in this way, and this is natural, but social construct plays a role and enhances these qualities and sometimes decreases, not only enhance. Sometimes, الفطرة كتمحى, or else you would not find disbelievers. All right, so if you people were able to disbelieve in God, and that's the strongest fitra that was created in them, then of course they can, quote unquote, disbelieve in gender and change their gender. This is actually less difficult than disbelieving in God. So that's more or less everything about gender and sex. At the end, we conclude that both views, or let's say at first that the constructionist view is mostly false and leads to disastrous results, but we can draw some very accurate findings from it to enhance the essentialist view, which is in essence correct, but leaves some things to be desired, some things to be asked. So we combine these two, but in essence, the essentialist view is obviously the better view. So if you want to ascribe yourself to one of these views, of course you are an essentialist. However, alhamdulillah, we don't need to ascribe ourselves to neither of these two. This was just to explain, but in fact, everything we have already in Islam. So yes, we reached the end of this session. I think we leave the questions. Sorry, we leave the questions for the next session. If you have any question or anything that you want to add, feel welcome. If you don't, I thank you once again for your presence. It is much appreciated. I hope everything was clear and beneficial for you. I enjoyed, as always, and see you inshallah in the next session. Take care of yourselves.